The year is 54 after Christ. Somewhere in the marble corridors of Rome, power changes hands, but not the way you think. An empire, the most feared, the most ruthless machine humanity has ever assembled, falls into the lap of a boy barely old enough to shave. 16 years old, no scars. No wars fought, no blood on his hands, not yet. His name is Nero Claudius Caesar Augustus Germanicus. Emperor, ruler of millions, commander of legions that could crush nations. But here's the part they don't carve into stone: he doesn't rule. She does. Agrippina the Younger, 43 years old. Sister to the mad Emperor Caligula, great-granddaughter of Augustus himself. This is not some decorative royal standing in the shadows. This is a woman who learned early that Rome doesn't hand power to the patient. It hands power to the ruthless. She clawed, she schemed. She poisoned her own husband, Emperor Claudius, without hesitation, without remorse. And she crowned her son not out of maternal devotion, but out of control. When Nero ascends, Agrippina doesn't step aside. She sits beside him in the Senate. Her face is minted on Roman coins as if she were an equal sovereign. She greets foreign dignitaries eye to eye as if the throne were hers, because in every way that matters it is. Rome isn't ruled by a teenage emperor. Rome is ruled by a mother pulling strings through her son's trembling hands. But then ancient historians Tacitus and Suetonius, writing independently decades apart, record something that chills the blood. Something both accounts, despite their differences, agree upon. Within months of Nero's coronation, the dynamic shifts, something breaks, something crosses a line. And it ends in one of the most infamous murders in Roman history. Now imagine this: you're inside the Imperial palace, a slave assigned to Nero's private quarters. You see everything, you hear everything, and you survive by learning one skill above all others: silence. Because one careless word, one misplaced whisper, means a quiet execution in the dark. Lately, something feels wrong. Nero has begun inviting his mother to private dinners, just the two of them. No guards, no advisors, no witnesses. At first, it seems harmless enough. A dutiful son sharing meals with the woman who made him emperor. But these dinners, they don't end quickly. They stretch on, hours deep into the night. And when Agrippina finally emerges, her clothes are disheveled, her hair undone, her face flushed, glowing. People notice. Nero's inner circle, Seneca the philosopher, Burrus the commander of the Praetorian Guard, feel their stomachs twist. Because what they're witnessing isn't politics anymore, it's obsession. Tacitus writes that the danger was no longer just maternal influence. It was physical, taboo, unthinkable. Historians still argue even now whether Nero and Agrippina truly crossed that final line, whether incest actually occurred. But here's the detail: every source agrees on Nero wanted it, and Agrippina encouraged it. She didn't stop him. She leaned into his desire, weaponized it. Used it to lock herself into absolute, untouchable power. Suetonius records that Agrippina would visit Nero during the day when he was drunk, vulnerable, unguarded. She dressed provocatively, positioned herself deliberately. Tacitus adds that Nero's advisors watched his fixation deepen, not like a son's affection, but like a sexual obsession spiraling out of control. And that terrified them. Because if Agrippina gained full control over Nero through this, her authority would be unbreakable. And Rome already knew how dangerous she was. So they made a desperate move. They introduced Nero to another woman. Her name was Acte, a freedwoman, a former slave, young, beautiful, and disturbingly, she looked a lot like Agrippina. Think about that for a moment. Their solution to the emperor's obsession with his own mother was to give him a replacement version of her. That's Rome, that's imperial power, and for a brief time it worked. Nero became infatuated with Acte. He spent less time with his mother. He began making decisions without consulting her first. For the first time in his life, Nero tasted independence. Agrippina noticed immediately, and she lost her mind. Tacitus says she began storming the palace at all hours, interrupting meetings. publicly humiliating Nero in front of his advisors. She reminded him again and again that she made him emperor, that without her poison, her plotting, her brutality, he would be nothing. Here's where the psychology turns ugly. Nero commands legions. He can order executions with a single word. And yet his mother makes him feel like a helpless child. He desires her, he hates her, he fears her. He depends on her. That's not a relationship, that's a cage. And Agrippina built it on purpose. Ancient sources make it clear this wasn't accidental. She cultivated his obsession. Used sexuality as leverage. When Nero pushed back, she dressed provocatively. When he tried to grow up, she dragged him back into dependency. Seduction one moment, humiliation the next. This wasn't maternal love, this was psychological warfare, and Nero was losing. By 59 after Christ, 5 years into his reign, Nero is 21 years old. He's married to Octavia for political reasons. He sleeps with women, he sleeps with men, he rules an empire. And yet, he still can't escape his mother. Every decision questioned, every advisor undermined. Every step toward independence crushed. The most powerful man on earth still trapped. But then he decides there's only one way out. According to Tacitus and Suetonius, Nero finally snaps, not slowly, not metaphorically. He hits a psychological wall. He decides his mother must die. But here's what makes this next part absolutely unhinged. Nero doesn't just want her gone, he wants it to look like an accident. Why? Because even while planning her death, he's still terrified of judgment, of gossip, of how Rome will see him. He wants the authority to kill his own mother without carrying the shame. That's not strength. That's the mindset of someone raised inside abuse. Even while plotting matricide, Nero is still desperate for her approval. He tries poison first. Big mistake. Agrippina has survived assassination attempts her entire life. She regularly takes antidotes like vitamins. The poison does nothing, so Nero escalates. He tries collapsing the ceiling in her bedroom. She survives. Then he goes bigger, darker, more theatrical. He sabotages her boat, rigging it to fall apart in the Bay of Naples. The plan is simple. She drowns, Rome shrugs, tragedy explained. The boat breaks apart on schedule, but Agrippina swims to shore. Let that sink in. The Emperor of Rome, ruler of the most advanced empire on earth, cannot successfully murder a 48-year-old woman because he's not just fighting her. He's fighting his own mind. After the failed boat attack, Nero panics. He knows Agrippina understands exactly what happened. And he knows her next move could end his reign. She could expose him, turn the Senate, replace him, so Nero finally does what he should have done from the beginning. He stops pretending, he sends soldiers. On March 23, 59 after Christ, Imperial guards arrive at Agrippina's villa outside Naples. She knows immediately why they're there. According to Tacitus, she doesn't scream, she doesn't run, she doesn't beg, she sits on her bed and waits. When the guards enter, led by a tribune named Anicetus, Agrippina makes one final statement. She points to her womb and says, "Strike here, strike here." The place Nero came from, the source of her control, the weapon she used to dominate an empire. She's telling them to destroy the symbol of their bond. The guards beat her to death. She dies from head wounds and stab injuries. She is 48 years old. A woman who spent her entire adult life chasing power, murdered by the son she created. And what happens next is just as disturbing. Nero returns to Rome and announces that his mother had been plotting to assassinate him, that he uncovered the conspiracy just in time. No one believes him. Everyone knows the truth, but no one challenges him because he's emperor. And emperors don't face consequences. The Senate sends congratulations. They declare a public thanksgiving. They vote to build temples celebrating Nero's survival of his mother's supposed betrayal. Imagine sitting in that chamber, knowing you're honoring a man who murdered his own mother, and voting yes anyway because what's the alternative? This is how tyranny actually works, not through one monster, but through thousands of people choosing survival over truth. For a short while after the murder, Nero seems relieved, almost euphoric. The woman who dominated his entire life is gone. He throws massive parties. He sings on public stages. He races chariots in front of roaring crowds, behavior considered scandalous for an emperor. But Nero doesn't care. His mother is dead. He's finally free, or so he thinks. According to both Tacitus and Suetonius, something starts happening almost immediately. Nero begins seeing his mother's ghost. Or at least it claims he does. He wakes up screaming in the middle of the night. He hires magicians and occult specialists to perform rituals to calm her spirit. He refuses to return to the Bay of Naples, the place where she died. During thunderstorms, he shouts that he can hear her voice in the thunder itself. Think about what that tells us. Killing her didn't free him, it just changed the shape of the prison. When Agrippina was alive, Nero was controlled by her presence, her voice, her manipulation, her body. Her threats, after her death, he's controlled by her memory, by guilt, by fear, by a ghost that never leaves. He didn't escape her power. He just traded one cage for another. And here's the part that should really mess with you: this wasn't a one-time tragedy. It wasn't even Rome's only example of a mother and son power disaster. And that's where this story gets even darker. This wasn't some freak accident of history. It was a pattern, a rigged system. In Imperial Rome, women couldn't grab power outright, so they funneled it through their sons. And sons often found only one exit from their mother's control: violence. Agrippina wasn't the first Roman mother to dominate an emperor. She was just the most successful until the system chewed her up too. And Nero wasn't the first ruler destroyed by maternal control. He was just the most infamous. Rome's power structure created both of them and then burned them alive. Now let's slow down and separate hard evidence from rumor. Did Nero and Agrippina actually have a physical incestuous relationship? Tacitus says it was possible, but stops short of calling it proven. Suetonius reports it as an open secret, widely circulated, whispered everywhere. Cassius Dio, writing more than a century later, states it as fact. So the uncomfortable truth is this: we don't know with absolute certainty, but here's what we do know, and this part is not up for debate. Nero was sexually obsessed with his mother. Agrippina exploited that obsession as a political weapon. Their relationship was deeply warped, even by Roman standards. That's not speculation. That's multiple independent ancient sources agreeing on the same reality. We also know how it ended: matricide. That part is locked in stone. And we know Nero never escaped it. In 65 after Christ, 6 years after Agrippina's murder, a massive conspiracy forms to assassinate Nero and replace him with a senator named Piso. The plot fails. Dozens of aristocrats are executed. Among them is Seneca, Nero's former tutor, the one man who genuinely tried to pull him out of his mother's orbit. By 68 after Christ, the empire cracks, provincial armies rebel, the military turns. The Senate finally flips. Nero is declared a public enemy. On June 9, 68 after Christ, Nero flees Rome, hunted, isolated, abandoned by almost everyone who once bowed to him. With soldiers closing in, he takes his own life. He is 30 years old. He ruled for 14 years. According to Suetonius, his final words are, "What an artist dies in me." No remorse, no regret, just vanity to the bitter end. But another account adds a detail that hits harder. In his final hours, Nero repeatedly asks if anyone has seen his mother. 9 years after killing her, he's still looking for her, still ruled by her, still trapped. That's the part that sticks in your throat. This isn't legend. This isn't gossip. We have deep documentation. Tacitus, Suetonius, Cassius Dio, 3 major historians, all disturbed enough to write this down in detail. They wanted future generations to understand how absolute power doesn't just corrupt politics, it rots families from the inside out. And yet, when this story gets taught today, it's often cleaned up, sanded down, wrapped in polite language. Nero had a difficult relationship with his mother. Agrippina was executed for political reasons. That's not history, that's a cover story. The real story is uglier. It's about a woman who weaponized motherhood to control an empire, and a man who couldn't escape his mother until he killed her and couldn't escape her even after that. That's the horror, the inescapability, the way trauma plus power turns people into monsters. Agrippina isn't a victim you're meant to sympathize with. She poisoned her husband, manipulated her son, used sexuality like a blade. But she was also trapped inside a system where women couldn't rule directly, where power only flowed through men, where the only tools available were manipulation, coercion, and murder. She played that game as brutally as any man, and she still lost. Nero isn't sympathetic either. He murdered his own mother. Later, he murdered his wife Octavia. He ordered countless executions. He blamed Christians for the Great Fire of Rome and launched the first imperial persecution. He was a monster, but he was also broken early, a child raised as a tool. A teenager handed an empire before his brain was fully formed. A young man who never learned how to build normal human bonds. The system cracked him long before he cracked others. Together, they destroyed far more than just each other. Advisors died for trying to separate them. Rivals were eliminated to protect Agrippina's grip on power. Innocent people were crushed in the crossfire of their psychological war. That's the real body count. Think about the soldiers who killed Agrippina. They were just following orders. But they had to live knowing they beat a woman to death while she pointed to her womb and told them to strike there. You don't walk away clean from that. You don't forget it. Think about the Senate. The men who congratulated Nero for surviving his mother's supposed betrayal. Every single one of them knew the truth. They still raised their hands, they still applauded. That's Rome, that's power, that's how empires rot. And after all of it, they still went home. They still looked at themselves in the mirror. Think about the ones who cleaned the rooms afterward. The ones who heard things they could never unhear. They carried those secrets for the rest of their lives. Powerless, shaken, guilty just for being close enough to witness it. That's what imperial power really does. It doesn't just rot the people at the top. It poisons everyone in the blast radius. So here's the question that should mess with your sleep. Could this happen today? Not literally. No emperors, no senates, no poisoned chalices. But the pattern, yeah, that part never left. A parent who refuses to let go. A child who can't escape their gravity. Love that curdles into control. Care that slowly turns into a cage. We see it in political dynasties where ambition eats families alive. We see it in homes where love becomes leverage and protection turns into possession. We see it in systems that tell women their only path to power is manipulation and tell men that strength means destroying whoever controls them. The names change, the empires rise and fall, the psychology stays the same. Agrippina and Nero weren't glitches in history. They were extreme versions of something painfully human, what happens when power and family mix without boundaries. If this story makes you uncomfortable, good. It's supposed to, because it refuses to stay buried in the past. It keeps reaching forward, reminding us that the most dangerous prisons aren't made of stone, but of relationships. When Nero took his own life in 68 after Christ, Agrippina had been dead for 9 years. 9 years of haunting him. 9 years of controlling him more effectively from the grave than she ever did in life. That's the ultimate irony. She won, even murdered by her own son she won, because he never escaped her. Not really. Some accounts say Nero's final words weren't about art at all. They were simpler, smaller, almost childlike. Mother, over and over again, some historians say he was hallucinating, others say he was expressing regret. Some think he was asking for forgiveness, but the answer might be simpler than all of that. He was still that 16-year-old boy. Still desperate for her approval, still needing her to tell him he deserved the throne. Agrippina spent her life chasing power through her son, and she achieved it even after death. Even after he murdered her, he was still hers. That isn't maternal love, and it isn't devotion. It's what happens when love becomes power and power turns violent and violence becomes impossible to escape. The Roman Empire survived Nero. It went on for centuries. New emperors rose, new dynasties collapsed, but this story stayed. It was written down by horrified historians, preserved, debated, studied, passed on. Because it exposes something uncomfortable about human nature. Agrippina and Nero loved each other in their own twisted way, and that love destroyed them. It destroyed everyone around them. That's the lesson. Love without boundaries isn't love. Control dressed up as care isn't protection. And power without accountability turns everything it touches into a nightmare. Nero made his mother his obsession. Agrippina made her son her weapon, and when those two forces collided, there was only one possible outcome: horror. "Strike here," she said, pointing to her womb, the place where it all began. The source of both their power and their destruction. The guards obeyed, they struck, they killed her, but they couldn't kill what she represented. They couldn't kill the psychological prison she built around her son. That prison outlived her. It outlived Nero, and in many ways it still exists. Every time this story is told, we're walking through that prison, seeing the bars, understanding how they were forged, and maybe, if we're paying attention, learning how not to build the same cage for ourselves, or for the people we claim to love. That's why history matters. Not to judge ancient Romans by modern standards, but to recognize patterns, to see the same traps dressed up in different clothes, to understand that power and family never mix cleanly. Love can be weaponized. Control can wear the mask of care. And sometimes, the people meant to protect us are the ones we need protection from. Agrippina the Younger, Nero Claudius Caesar, mother and son, manipulator and victim. Victim and murderer, both trapped, both destroyed, both remembered not as heroes, not even just as villains, but as warnings. Rome taught that lesson in blood, in madness, in matricide. The only question is, are we listening?